For almost 20 years, I was involved in recruiting partners into the Era Group network. Senior executives making the move into independent consulting. Hundreds of those conversations, now thousands, I think, across 50 or so countries. And there was one question that came up regularly that, if I'm being honest, made me a bit uncomfortable every time I heard it. People would say, "So Arndt, how does the pipeline of new clients actually get built?" The reason it made me quite uncomfortable is simple. There isn't a clean answer. I couldn't stand up in a room full of smart, experienced people and say, "Here are the 3 steps, do them in order, and clients for your consulting practice will follow." Because that's just not how it works, right? Building a pipeline as an independent advisor is genuinely personal. What works brilliantly for one person is completely wrong for another. And I've seen enough people struggle, not because they lack the skills or the credibility, but because someone had told them to build their pipeline in a way that was just completely at odds with how they naturally operate. To know that one generic answer would actually do more harm than good. Let me give you a concrete example of what I mean. At networking events, the Chamber of Commerce breakfast, industry roundtables, the kind of room where everybody's holding a coffee and a business card and doing that slightly awkward thing where you hover near a group and hope that somebody will make eye contact. I am, by most measures, a pretty natural extrovert. I genuinely like people and I like conversations. And I still find myself standing in the corner of those rooms just waiting for it to be over. For some people, those networking events is the environment where they are completely at home, where relationships form naturally and the pipeline flows. For me, and honestly for a lot of executives I've worked with, it's about an hour of managed discomfort that produces almost nothing. The same goes for social selling, right? Content marketing, cold outreach. Every channel has people for whom it works really well, and every channel has people for whom it simply doesn't work. There isn't one size fits all answer. And everyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. What there is, and what we eventually built at Era Group after years of watching what worked for new starters, is a way of figuring out which channels are right for you specifically and then going properly deep on those rather than doing 5 things badly at once. Before we talk about what to build, I want to be honest about why the obvious first answer many people give, or just work your network, runs out faster than most people expect. Look, your network is genuinely one of the most valuable things that you build over your career. I don't want to dismiss that, I think we all agree. But I think it's worth being really precise about what the network really is. Your network is a snapshot. It captures the relationships that you build within a specific context, the particular industry, particular function, and the particular era of your life. It reflects who you knew when you had a certain title, were in a certain business, and were backed by a certain institutional credibility. That context is now gone for many of you, and gradually, without anything dramatic happening, the network starts to lose shape. Former colleagues will move on to new roles, different priorities. People who would have happily championed you 18 months ago, for them now, they're in the middle of their own transition maybe. Relationships that felt completely solid in your last year in corporate, they're quietly, slowly drifting. And there's something else worth understanding about your network that most people don't really take time to sit with. It was never actually designed to generate a pipeline, right? Your network was designed to give you access, information, introductions in a world where your institution was already providing the credibility and the authority behind your name. Your network and your employer worked as a system. Pull one out and the other is considerably weaker than it appears on paper. And there's a moment almost every executive who starts their own business hits somewhere between month 6 and 9 or 12. You've had the early coffees with some of your peers, warm introductions have been made, and the thing that felt like building real momentum in the first couple of months starts to feel like you're just running in place. It was built for a world where you had an institution behind you, and that world is gone. So what do you build instead? What we actually built for our starters at Era, after years of watching what actually worked across hundreds of different people in dozens of different markets, wasn't a single sales methodology. It was a playbook. A set of frameworks and templates built around everything every meaningful channel of independent work that's available. Content, direct outreach, networking, yes, referral systems, platform relationships, speaking assignments, publishing, strategic partnerships. Look, each channel had its own structure, its own cadence, its own way of knowing whether it was actually working. The question is not which channels might be interesting to experiment with. I think it's which of the 2 or 3 that you're genuinely going to commit to consistently, long enough, deep enough to actually get good at them. Because the failure pattern I saw most often wasn't executives who refused to build a pipeline. It was executives who tried to build several pipelines at once, half-heartedly, and got traction in none of them really. They post a bit on LinkedIn for 3 weeks, see not much happening, and then they conclude that content isn't for me. They go on a couple of networking events that be uncomfortable, very much like I described earlier, and they would write off that whole channel of networking events. They'd send 20 outreach messages, get 2 replies, and decided that cold outreach also wasn't for them. But none of those experiments ran long enough and went deep enough to actually tell you anything. 3 weeks of LinkedIn isn't content marketing, right? 2 networking events isn't networking. 20 messages isn't outreach. The executives who built real consistent pipeline did something different. They picked a small number of channels, one that generally matched how they naturally operate, and then they went to what I would call mastery. They stopped dabbling across everything and got properly good at 2 or 3 things. A pipeline built on channels you're generally good at will always outperform one on channels you're supposed to use. So, what are the channels that actually matter for senior independent advisors? And how do you figure out which ones are for you? Here are the 5 I've seen work most consistently, and for each one, the kind of person who tends to thrive in it. Number 1, published thinking. If you have a genuine point of view and you like writing, like a newsletter, a series of articles, a body of content that consistently names a problem your client has, this is the channel for someone who thinks clearly in writing and who has something specific to say. Not just general wisdom, but a real perspective on a particular problem. It's the slowest channel, but it compounds in a way that other channels won't. Every piece of published thinking becomes a permanent inbound system. If you find writing energizing rather than draining, and you can generally sustain a kind of a weekly rhythm for a newsletter, for example, this is often the highest leverage thing that you can do, and you can start early. Number 2, direct outreach. If you're precise, patient, and good at research, not cold calling, not sending the same LinkedIn message to 200 people, highly targeted outreach to a small number of people who you have selected around a problem that's specific. You've written in a way that shows you've done real homework on their situation. This channel rewards exactly the skills that made senior executives effective in corporate conversations. Reading a situation carefully before you enter it, understanding what the other person actually needs, opening with something genuinely useful rather than just a sales pitch. Done well, it generates pipeline faster than anything else. The failure mode is volume without precision here. Number 3, warm referral systems. If you deliver outstanding work and you're willing to be deliberate about asking the most underused channel by a significant margin, because it requires one thing most executives find slightly uncomfortable. It's kind of closing the loop, is what I call it in my flywheel. Every completed engagement produces 3 things: reference, a relationship that can generate referrals, and a sharper story about who you actually are. Most executives deliver the work well, and then they walk away without asking for any of those 3 things. The testimonials goes uncaptured. The introduction goes unasked for. Building a referral system isn't pushy, it's deliberate, and a client who's generally happy with your work almost always wants to help. You just have to make it easy for them. Number 4, I would call it platform and community relationships. And if you build trust slowly and benefit from it for a long time, relationships with consulting networks, sector communities, board advisory groups, fellow advisors in, neighboring areas. Those channels are for people who find one-to-one relationships building more natural than broadcasting, right? Who'd rather invest deeply in 3 relationships than broadly in many. One genuinely trusted platform relationship kept warm over time will produce more qualified conversation than 100 cold outreach messages. And unlike the network you build in your corporate career, these relationships, they don't decay because they're not tied to a context that no longer exists. They'll compound. Number 5, speaking and events. And this is for all of you who generally become alive in front of the right room. And I'm not talking about the Chamber of Commerce breakfasts. We've established that those don't work for most people. But targeted appearances in front of specifically chosen audiences, like industry conferences, roundtables, executive peer groups. If you're somebody who generally energizes in front of a room, not just tolerates it, but actually thrives, this channel can build profile and pipeline simultaneously in ways that are hard to replicate anywhere else. The key is being specific about which rooms you say yes to, and most really aren't worth your time. A few will be. So we talked 5 channels here. You don't need all 5. You probably shouldn't try all 5. Pick the 2 or 3 that match how you actually operate. And you build your playbook around those. Get the mastery before you think about adding anything else. So, the question that made me uncomfortable for almost 20 years, hey Arndt, how do I build a pipeline, isn't actually a hard question when you approach it properly. I think it's a deeply personal question, and the answer depends on who you are and how you operate. And if you get that right, I think I've seen pipeline follows. Get it wrong or try to build it in a way that somebody else tells you to do, and you'll probably work very hard for a long time and not understand why the hell this isn't working. For me, the pipeline sits very firmly within the second curve architecture framework. I have this flywheel where once you have your market positioning right, you need to get your pipeline in place, and then you control it with the governance, saying no to the right things. That's quite important. And then you deliver. So if you're interested in getting the full framework, it's on this channel and the link is in the description. I'll see you there.